I've been working the night desk at the Pineview Motel for 3 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. And honestly, I prefer the quiet hours between midnight and 6 a.m. Most guests are asleep, and I can catch up on my online classes or read without interruption. The motel sits on a lonely stretch of highway about 40 miles outside of town. We get truckers, traveling salespeople, and the occasional family trying to save money on their vacation. Nothing exciting ever happens here, which is exactly how I like it. That changed last Tuesday night. Around 2 a.m., I was reviewing my psychology notes when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not unusual. Sometimes guests need ice or have forgotten something in their car. But these footsteps were different. Slow, deliberate, and they seemed to pause at every door. I looked up from my textbook and watched the security monitor. Our cameras cover most of the exterior and the main hallway, but the picture quality isn't great. I could see a dark figure moving down the corridor, stopping at each room. At first, I thought maybe it was Mr. Henderson from room 12. He checked in earlier that evening and seemed a bit confused, possibly dealing with some early dementia. But as I watched more closely, something felt wrong. The figure wasn't knocking on doors or trying handles. They were just standing there motionless for about 30 seconds at each room before moving to the next. The timestamp showed they'd been at this for over 20 minutes. I decided to investigate. I grabbed the master key and my flashlight, though the hallway lights were working fine. As I stepped out of the office, the footsteps stopped. The hallway was empty. I walked the entire length of the corridor, checking each room number. All the doors were closed, no signs of disturbance. I even knocked softly on Mr. Henderson's door, but there was no answer. Just the sound of steady snoring from inside. Back at the desk, I rewound the security footage. The timestamp showed me walking down the empty hallway, but there was no sign of the figure I'd seen just minutes before. I checked the recording from the past hour. Nothing unusual appeared on any camera. I convinced myself I'd been studying too long and was seeing things. I made some coffee and tried to focus on my homework, but I kept glancing at the monitors. At 3:17 a.m., I heard them again. The footsteps. This time, I didn't hesitate. I immediately switched to the live camera feed and watched the hallway. Empty. But I could still hear the footsteps, clear as day, moving from room to room. The sound was coming from the hallway. I was certain of it. But the camera showed nothing. I called my supervisor, Janet, but it went straight to voicemail. I almost called the police, but what would I tell them? That I was hearing invisible footsteps? They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. The footsteps continued for another hour, always the same pattern. Pause at each door, stand motionless, then move to the next. I tried to time it, and each stop lasted exactly 37 seconds. I know because I counted along, trying to stay calm. At 4:23 a.m., they stopped at room 8. Room 8 had been empty for 3 days. We'd had a plumbing issue, and it was temporarily out of service. But I could hear the footsteps pause there just like at every other room. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A key turning in a lock. I knew every sound in this motel. I'd heard thousands of guests unlock their doors over the years, and this was unmistakably that metallic click and turn. But room 8 was locked from the outside, and I had the only key. I grabbed my phone and started recording audio. The footsteps resumed, but now they seemed to be coming from inside room 8, pacing back and forth, like someone was walking around the small space. I had to see what was happening. I took the master key and headed for room 8, my phone still recording. The footsteps grew louder as I approached the door. I pressed my ear against it and could hear someone moving around inside. The creak of floorboards, the sound of the bathroom door opening and closing. I knocked softly. "Hello, is someone in there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. I waited a full minute, then slowly inserted the key. The lock turned easily and I pushed the door open. The room was empty. No signs that anyone had been inside. The bed was still stripped, the bathroom door open, everything exactly as maintenance had left it. But the room was ice cold. I checked the thermostat. It was set to 68 degrees, same as all the other rooms. I held up my phone to check the temperature app. It read 43 degrees. I backed out of the room quickly and locked the door. As I walked back to the office, I heard the footsteps resume behind me. But this time, they seemed to be following me. I didn't turn around. I got to the office, locked the door, and sat at my desk, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside the office window. I forced myself to look at the security monitor. The area outside the office was empty. At 6 a.m., Janet arrived for the day shift. I told her about the plumbing issue in room 8, that we might need to check the heating system. I didn't mention the footsteps. That night, I called in sick. I've never missed a shift before, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. The next morning, Janet called me. She sounded strange, almost hesitant. "Did anything unusual happen during your last shift?" she asked. "Why do you ask?" "We had a guest complaint. Mrs. Chen in room 9 said she heard someone pacing in the room next to hers all night. She couldn't sleep. Room 9 is right next to room 8. She said it sounded like someone was walking back and forth, and she heard the bathroom door opening and closing repeatedly. She was pretty upset about it." I felt my stomach drop. "What did you tell her?" "I checked the records. Room 8 has been empty for days. I went in there myself to investigate, thinking maybe we had a leak or something causing noise. But the strangest thing, the room was freezing cold. I mean, absolutely frigid. I've never felt anything like it." I quit the next day. Told Janet I got a better job offer, which wasn't true. I just couldn't go back to that place. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I looked up the history of the Pineview Motel last week. I found an old newspaper article from 1987. A traveling salesman named David Kerr had died in room 8. Heart attack in his sleep. The article mentioned that he'd been found 3 days after he died because housekeeping had been told he was extending his stay. The article said he'd been scheduled to check out on a Tuesday night. I dug deeper into the archives. There were more articles, complaints from guests over the years about strange noises from room 8. The motel had tried to rent it out normally for months after Kerr's death, but guests kept requesting room changes. They reported the same things I'd experienced: footsteps, extreme cold, the sound of someone pacing. The most disturbing article was from 1989. A family had stayed in room 9, right next door. Their 8-year-old daughter told her parents that the man in the next room kept walking around all night and that he'd waved at her through the window. But room 8 had been empty that entire week. Last month, I drove past the Pineview Motel. I couldn't help myself. I had to see if anything had changed. The no vacancy sign was lit up, which was unusual for a Tuesday night, but room 8's window was dark and there was yellow caution tape stretched across the door. I called Janet from the parking lot. She sounded tired when she answered. "We had to seal off room 8 permanently," she said. "Too many complaints. The final straw was last week. A guest in room 7 called the police, convinced someone was trying to break down the wall between the rooms. Said it sounded like someone was pounding on the wall and shouting for help." She paused, and I could hear her lighting a cigarette. But here's the thing. There was no damage to the wall, no marks, no scratches, nothing. And the guests swore they heard a voice saying, "I need to check out, I need to check out," over and over again. Every Tuesday night since then, I wonder if he's still trying to leave. I clean rooms at the Desert Rose Motel on weekends to make extra money. It's not glamorous work, but I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I've gotten into a routine. I start at 7 a.m. and finish by 3 p.m., which gives me time to pick up my daughter from school. The motel isn't fancy, but it's clean, and the manager, Carlos, treats me well. Most guests are respectful, and I rarely have problems. You learn to work around people's habits. Some leave towels everywhere. Others are neat as a pin. I've seen it all. Last month, though, I started noticing something odd about room 15. It's a corner room on the second floor, and I clean it every weekend. The guest, Mr. Shaw, had been staying there for almost 3 weeks. Carlos told me he was some kind of consultant, working on a project in town. He paid cash for the week in advance, which isn't unusual for business travelers. The first time I cleaned his room, I noticed how organized everything was. His clothes were folded perfectly in the dresser. His toiletries lined up precisely on the bathroom counter. Even his shoes were arranged in a perfect line by the door. Some people are just particular about their space, and I respected that. But over the weeks, I started noticing other things. He never seemed to sleep in the bed. Every Saturday morning, the bedsheets were still perfectly made, exactly as I'd left them the week before. The pillows were untouched, still fluffed, and positioned just so. At first, I thought maybe he was making the bed himself, but the hospital corners were exactly the same, and I have a very specific way of tucking sheets that housekeeping taught me. His towels were always dry and folded in the exact same position. The soap in the bathroom was never used, still in its wrapper, though there was a different bar each week. His toothbrush looked new every time I saw it, and the toothpaste tube never seemed to get any smaller. I mentioned it to Carlos once, just casually. That guest in 15 must be the neatest person I've ever seen. Carlos looked confused. Room 15, that's been empty for 2 weeks. I showed him my cleaning log. No, Mr. Shaw, I've been cleaning around his things every weekend. Carlos checked his reservation system. We had a Shaw about a month ago, but he only stayed 1 night. Room 15 has been vacant since then. I thought there must be some mistake with the booking system. It happens sometimes. Guests pay cash, and the front desk forgets to update the computer. But I knew someone was staying in that room. I'd seen the evidence every week. The next Saturday, I paid closer attention. Mr. Shaw's belongings were there as usual. The precisely folded clothes, the lined-up toiletries, the unused towels. But something felt different. The air in the room was heavy, almost oppressive. And it was cold, much colder than the other rooms. I decided to do a little test. I moved one of his shoes slightly, just nudged it an inch to the left. Then I did my usual cleaning routine and left. The following Saturday, the shoe was back in its exact original position. That's when I started getting scared. I began documenting everything with my phone. Pictures of the room before and after cleaning, focusing on the placement of his belongings. Week after week, everything was identical. Not just similar, identical. Down to the exact fold in a shirt sleeve, the precise angle of his glasses on the nightstand. I started timing myself in that room. I'm usually efficient, but room 15 was taking me longer each week. Not because it was messier, it never needed much cleaning, but because I felt like I was moving through thick air. My movements felt sluggish, and I often found myself pausing, forgetting what I was doing. One Saturday, I was changing the sheets when I noticed something that made my hand shake. There was an indentation in the mattress, exactly the size and shape of a person lying down, but the sheets on top were still perfectly made, untouched. I pressed my hand into the indentation. It was ice cold. I finished cleaning as quickly as I could and left. But as I was walking down the hallway, I heard a door close behind me. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. Room 15's door was closed, just as I'd left it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mr. Shaw and his perfectly organized belongings. I tried to remember if I'd ever actually seen him, but I realized I hadn't. I'd seen his things, but never him. I decided to ask Carlos to show me the registration from Mr. Shaw's original stay. He was reluctant at first, but I explained that I was concerned about the room. He pulled up the record. "Weird," Carlos said, staring at the screen. He checked in on March 15th, but there's no checkout date. The system shows he's still here, but I know he's not. I remember him leaving. What did he look like? Carlos frowned. You know, I can't really remember. Average height, maybe. Dark hair. Strange. I check people in every day, but I can't picture his face at all. I asked if there were any security cameras in the parking lot that might have recorded him leaving. Carlos checked the footage from around the time Mr. Shaw supposedly left, but there was nothing unusual. No one leaving the motel during those hours. The next Saturday, I made a decision. I was going to wait and see if Mr. Shaw ever came back to his room. I finished cleaning the other rooms and then positioned myself in the stairwell where I could see the door to room 15. I waited for 2 hours, but no one came or went. Finally, I walked back to room 15 and used my key to check one more time. Everything was exactly as I'd left it after cleaning. But as I was about to leave, I noticed something new. There was a piece of paper on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. A handwritten note that said, "Thank you for keeping my room so clean. I appreciate your attention to detail." My hands were shaking as I read it. The handwriting was neat, precise, just like everything else about Mr. Shaw. But the ink looked faded, like it had been written years ago. I left the room immediately and went straight to Carlos. I showed him the note, but he just stared at it blankly. "I don't understand," he said. "Room 15 is empty. Has been for weeks. I quit that day. I just couldn't go back to that room." But the note haunted me. I kept thinking about that precise handwriting, the faded ink. Something about it felt familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. 2 weeks after I quit, I was cleaning out my car and found an old receipt that had fallen under the seat. It was from my very first day working at the Desert Rose Motel 2 years ago, Carlos had given me a list of cleaning supplies to pick up, and I'd kept the receipt for my records. The handwriting on the receipt was identical to the note I'd found in room. I called Carlos immediately. The first day I worked there, you gave me a handwritten list of supplies to buy. Do you remember that? Sure, he said. I always write those out by hand. Why? Who wrote the list? Was it you? There was a long pause. That's strange. I can't remember writing it, but it must have been me, right? I drove to the hardware store where I'd bought the supplies and asked to see their security footage from 2 years ago. They couldn't help me. The footage was only kept for 6 months. But the clerk, an elderly man named Pete, remembered me. You came in with that list, he said, but you know what was odd? You seemed confused about it. You kept staring at the handwriting like you'd never seen it before. I didn't remember being confused, but I was starting to understand that my memory of that first day wasn't reliable. There were gaps, pieces that didn't quite fit together. Last week, I was driving past the Desert Rose Motel, and I saw something that made me pull over. There was a figure in the window of room 15. Just a shadow, but it was moving around, organizing things, folding clothes, arranging toiletries. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching. The figure never stopped moving, never paused. Just the same careful, precise movements, over and over. But as I watched, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The way the figure moved, the methodical organization. It looked exactly like how I clean rooms. The same sequence, the same attention to detail. I called Carlos from my car. Is anyone staying in room 15? Room 15? No. Why? I looked up at the window again. The figure was still there, still organizing. And for just a moment, in the reflection of the glass, I could swear I saw my own face staring back at me. No reason, I said, and hung up. I booked the Starlight Motel online for my cross-country drive. It had decent reviews, and the price was right, $59 a night. I was driving from Portland to visit my sister in Atlanta, and I needed somewhere to sleep in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. The website was basic but functional. I selected my dates, entered my credit card information, and received a confirmation email immediately. Everything seemed normal. The email confirmed my reservation for room 22, check-in September 14th, check-out September 15th. The motel's address was listed as 1847 Highway 36, Millbrook, Colorado. I plugged it into my GPS and continued planning my route. I left Portland on September 13th, planning to drive about 10 hours and arrive at the motel in the early evening. The drive was uneventful. Long stretches of highway, small towns, beautiful mountain scenery. I stopped for gas and food a few times, but mostly just drove. As the sun started setting, I began looking for signs for Millbrook. According to my GPS, I should have been getting close, but I didn't see any signs for the town, and the highway seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. My GPS kept recalculating, telling me to continue straight. The estimated arrival time kept changing. First 7:30 p.m., then 8:15 p.m., then 9 p.m. I was getting frustrated and tired. Finally, around 9:30 p.m., I saw a sign that said Millbrook, 2 miles. I felt relieved. I'd been driving for over 12 hours, and I was ready to collapse into a bed. The town was tiny, just a few buildings clustered around a single intersection. I could see the motel sign glowing in the distance. Starlight Motel, vacancy. It looked exactly like the photo on the website. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed I was the only car there. Not unusual for a small-town motel on a weeknight. I grabbed my overnight bag and headed for the office. The lobby was small but clean, with wood paneling and outdated furniture that gave it a retro charm. An older man stood behind the counter, wearing a plaid shirt and reading a newspaper. "You must be Miss Patterson," he said before I could speak. "Room 22. We've been expecting you." I was impressed by the personal service. "Yes, that's right. I have a reservation." He turned the guest register around for me to sign. The page was blank, except for my name, already written in neat handwriting at the top. Below it was today's date. "No need to show ID," he said. "We have all your information already." He handed me a physical key, not a key card, but an actual metal key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped fob with 22 printed on it. I hadn't seen a motel key like that in years. "Room 22 is upstairs, end of the hall. Checkout is at 11 a.m. Continental breakfast starts at 6. I thanked him and headed upstairs. The hallway was dimly lit, with patterned carpet that looked like it was from the 1970s. I found room 22 and unlocked the door. The room was clean but dated. 2 double beds with floral bedspreads, a small TV, a window that looked out over the parking lot. Everything you'd expect from a budget motel. I was exhausted, so I didn't spend much time looking around. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I was washing my hands, I noticed something odd. The mirror above the sink was old and slightly warped, but in the reflection, I could see the room behind me. Both beds were visible, but only one looked slept in. That wasn't unusual. I'd only used one bed, but in the mirror, I could see someone lying in the other bed. I spun around, heart pounding. The second bed was empty, covers still perfectly made. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there, a dark shape under the covers of the bed that was empty behind me. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things because I was tired. But the figure in the mirror didn't disappear. It seemed to be sleeping peacefully, occasionally shifting position. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it on the empty bed. Nothing there, but in the mirror, illuminated by my phone's light, I could clearly see someone sleeping. I was too freaked out to go back to sleep. I sat in the chair by the window and waited for morning. Occasionally glancing at the mirror, the figure never disappeared. It was just sleeping in the reflection of the empty bed. At 6 a.m., I heard movement in the hallway. Probably other guests heading to breakfast. I decided to pack up and get out as soon as possible. I went downstairs to check out. The same man was behind the counter, wearing the same plaid shirt, reading what looked like the same newspaper. "Checking out of room 22, he asked. "Yes, thank you." He made a note in the register. "I hope you slept well. No problems with the room." I wanted to ask about the mirror, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. "It was fine, thank you." As I walked toward the door, he called after me. "Ms. Patterson, you forgot to sign out." I turned back. The guest register was open to the same page where I'd signed in. My name was still at the top, but now there was a second signature below it. The handwriting was different, more flowing, elegant. The name was David Patterson. "I'm sorry, who is David Patterson?" I asked. The man looked confused. "You signed in together last night, your husband." I felt cold. "I'm not married. I checked in alone." He looked at the register, then at me. "According to this, you both checked into room 22. You signed in first, then your husband signed in right after you." I stared at the register. I clearly remembered signing in alone, and the page had been blank except for my name. But now there were two signatures, and the second one looked like it had been there for hours. "There must be some mistake," I said. The man flipped through the register, looking at previous pages. "Here," he said, pointing to an entry from exactly 1 year ago. "September 14th last year. Same names, same room." I looked at the page. There were my name and David Patterson's name, signed in the same handwriting as today. But I'd never been to this motel before in my life. "And the year before that," the man continued, flipping back another page. "Same date, same room, same names." Page after page, going back years. Every September 14th, the same two names in room 22. I ran to my car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached Denver, where I checked into a chain hotel and tried to make sense of what had happened. That night, I searched online for David Patterson and my maiden name. I found an obituary from 12 years ago. David Patterson, age 34, had died in a car accident on September 14th. He'd been traveling cross-country to meet his fiancée. His fiancée's name was Sarah Mitchell, my maiden name. I'd never heard of David Patterson before, but according to the obituary, we'd been engaged. The accident happened on Highway 36 in Colorado, just outside a small town called Millbrook. I called the phone number listed for the Starlight Motel. It rang once, then I heard a recording. "The number you have dialed is not in service." I checked the website where I'd made my reservation. The page no longer existed. There was no record of the Starlight Motel online anywhere. I tried to find Millbrook on the map, but couldn't locate it. The coordinates from my GPS led to an empty stretch of highway. Yesterday, I got a credit card statement. There was no charge for the motel room, but in my wallet, I still have the key to room 22. The strangest part came 3 days later. I was going through old photo albums, looking for pictures to show my sister when I finally made it to Atlanta. In an album from college, I found a photo that made me drop the book. It was a picture of me at a party, sophomore year. I was standing next to a guy I didn't recognize, both of us smiling at the camera. Someone had written on the back of the photo in blue ink, "Sarah and David, Spring Formal, 1999. I had no memory of this person, no memory of going to Spring Formal with anyone named David. But there was the photo, in my own handwriting on the back. I called my college roommate, Jennifer. She'd been with me through most of college, and if anyone would remember, it would be her. "David Patterson," she said when I asked. "Of course I remember David. You two were together for almost a year. You were crazy about him." "Jen, I've never heard of David Patterson in my life." There was a long silence on the other end. "Sarah, that's impossible. You introduced me to him. We all hung out together constantly. He was studying engineering, wanted to move out west after graduation. You two talked about getting married. But I had no memory of any of this, none at all. What happened to him? I asked. You don't remember? He transferred schools junior year. You were devastated. You cried for weeks. I hung up and immediately called my mother. If I'd been in a serious relationship in college, she would have known about it. David Patterson, she said. Honey, of course I remember David. Such a sweet boy. I was so sad when you two broke up. You brought him home for Thanksgiving twice. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. How could everyone remember this person that I had no memory of? I found my old college yearbooks and searched through them carefully. Sure enough, there was David Patterson in the engineering section. The photo showed a young man with dark hair and kind eyes. Below his picture was a quote, "The best journeys are the ones that lead you home." As I stared at the photo, fragments started coming back. Hazy memories, like looking through fog. A hand holding mine. Someone laughing at my terrible jokes. The feeling of being completely understood by another person. But they felt like someone else's memories, not my own. Yesterday, I got a credit card statement. There was no charge for the motel room. But in my wallet, I still have the key to room 22. And now I understand that some reservations can't be cancelled, no matter how hard you try to forget.